So I've been wanting to know for a fair while, how do I take my watercolours and make them really huge? And I've played around with acrylics and oils, but the problem is that I don't really know that medium very well. So I've decided to see if I can go large with watercolours. And obviously to do that it's going to be difficult on paper. You can only get paper to a certain size. So if I want to go to something like 3 meters by a meter or something like that, then I can't really do that on paper, watercolour on paper. And then you have to get a frame, and then when you start going huge with glass it's a problem, and that sort of thing. So what I'm going to work out is how to paint on canvas with watercolour, because I've been doing some work with acrylics on canvas and trying to get the acrylics to behave like a watercolour, but I haven't had much luck. I painted this the other day, and I used acrylics, golden fluid acrylics. I used this golden Absorbent Ground, but I still didn't like the way it behaved on the page. So what I'm going to be testing tonight is golden Absorbent Ground and this QOR Watercolour Ground and Daniel Smith Watercolour Ground, and then this QOR cold press ground. So these 4 different grounds, and I'm going to be testing tonight on a 12-ounce cotton canvas, and I'm going to do some other testing on some other canvases as well to just see how they behave. So these have already been primed and gessoed, and I'm just going to put these grounds on top of here in some quarters, and then I'm going to paint in a way that I would normally paint, which is with a different size hake brushes, wet in wet, and having that watercolour cauliflower and granulate and all of that sort of thing. So we'll see how that goes. Thanks, let's go. So I'm just going to divide it roughly into quarters. And we're going to do golden Absorbent Ground down here. So that's golden Absorbent Ground. You can see that. So that's going to be that one. And then we'll go QOR cold pressed. So that's that one. Beautiful. And then we've got QOR Watercolour Ground. So that's that one. Beautiful. And then we've got Daniel Smith. Watercolour Ground. Beautiful. And that's that one. Right. So all I'm going to do is apply it in the way that it says in the instructions. This one you can water down to and add 25% water from what it said, but I'm just going to apply it straight in this case. I'll do another experiment at some stage. And what I'll end up doing is just fast forwarding through all of this, making this nice and fast for you so you don't have to end up watching me do this. But I suppose what I want is something to end up matching as closely as possible to the watercolour paper that I paint on, and I paint on Reeves BFK etching paper, and sometimes some Arches 300 GSM cold pressed paper, but most of the time it's on Reeves BFK etching paper. So but really it's about whether the watercolour behaves in the way that I would like it to behave, like it normally does. And then I'm going to play around with fixatives and work out which fixatives are the best ones to use, because you can get matte, satin and gloss. And I'm going to use spray varnishes, because with a watercolour, I think if you tried to brush over, especially on a canvas, from what I've watched so far on YouTube, you can lift out lights much more easily off a canvas than you can normally off paper, and so it makes varnishing it with a brush much more of a problem. So I think I'm going to end up doing about 4 coats like this. What I don't really want is huge brush marks, because so far my experience has been that if you have huge rivets, again, that'll affect the movement of the watercolour. And initially I don't really want, I might want that later on, but at the moment I don't. Alright. Beautiful. So that's the first layer of the golden absorbent ground, and then I'll end up doing 4 of those. Washing out the brush. And now we're going to do QOR cold pressed ground. Alright. Now this one just says apply thick or thin and then let it dry. Great instructions. Excellent. And I have seen some videos of people doing this, and I saw someone do it with a sponge, and it just looked very chunky to me, and I don't really want chunky. I don't want it to be like hot pressed paper, but at the same time, so I should make sure that my head doesn't get in the way. I'm very bad at remembering about that. Get my head out of the way. This is definitely very interesting, this cold press. It's quite different to the other ones. It does seem to almost have like paper pulp inside it. I can imagine I'd go through this a lot faster than the golden absorbent ground, because it's just a bit thicker, but I can also imagine it behaving a little bit more like paper, but I suppose we'll just wait and see, won't we? This one, if you wanted some effects then underneath, make it a bit more impasto, then you probably couldn't. And the other thing is that I bought some light dimensional ground, and again that's mostly designed so you can get some texture if you want it, but I'm not introducing that as a whole nother thing at the moment. We're just going to test out these grounds. And again, I'm just trying to be careful to just make it so that there's not huge brush marks. And it doesn't say you can add water to this in the instructions, but those instructions were pretty limited, I have to say. Instructions of handmade paper-like surface, apply thick or thin, let dry. It's pretty crap, but I suppose I could have a look at their product, see if they have any more information online. And I suppose again it would depend on what brush you use to lay it down. Like I could, if to using a bigger, thicker brush. So this will do for now. I'll use the same brush. Alright. I also heard the other day that some of these grounds, they separate and don't keep for very long, so again, I'll find out if that's true or not, but alright, QOR watercolour ground. Rinse my brush off. Whoa. This is the watercolour ground here. Wow. This is pretty, I don't know if you can see that very well, but it's very thin. Imagine this producing a very different ground. Don't want to waste any. Get it all off the lid. Nice. I should read these directions. Absorbent surfaces apply 2 to 3 layers, may thin with up to 25% water, let dry 24 to 72 hours. Is that between layers or after the layers? I think it'll probably be after the layers. I don't imagine you need to wait that long between layers, especially if I just get my hairdryer out in a bit and I just make it dry. That's my plan. Because I don't really like things taking ages to do, so if I can speed a process up, just get on with it. That's what I want to do. These are definitely easier to apply than the cold pressed ground, and definitely end up using less, but at the same time that other one does sort of end up looking a bit more like paper. We'll find out. I'm sure if you added a bit more water to this, then it would be even better at levelling. Nice, that's that one. QOR, I better make sure I keep doing the right ones. So this is the last one. I just opened it up, and this is the Daniel Smith Watercolour Ground. It's a little bit thicker on the edges than it is in the middle, but it's okay. Just get a bit on there. Nice. This canvas is definitely sucking this. Oh, let's read the instructions. Don't read them. Oof. Need my glasses on. Paintable surface for watercolour, absorbent surfaces, canvas paper, plaster, blah blah blah. For best results. Abraded before application. Didn't do that. Thick brush line, heavy pigment, allowed 24 to 40 hours to cure before applying watercolour or acrylics. Can be thinned 10% with water. wash brushes immediately. Do not apply heat to speed drying time. Ooh, well that's lucky it said that. And maybe I shouldn't do that to any of the others. Maybe the others shouldn't be either. Right, so maybe I better not do that. It's interesting. Maybe that changes the potential structure a bit. Imagine if I was doing a huge canvas, you would go through an awful lot of this. And end up buying huge volumes of this. They sold huge volumes of it. And again, I don't know what... I know some of these you can get in large containers, like I got the golden one there, but I think you can even get a big bucket of that golden Absorbent Ground. But I'm sure I'll cross that bridge when I work out which one I actually want to be using, and then I'll find out if that's going to be a cost-effective option for large canvases. Maybe this would be good to be able to tell something, because this one is a little bit more, it's just behaves differently than the other thing was. Right. So this one doesn't say to do lots of layers. This is the Daniel Smith, doesn't say to do lots of layers. The QOR Watercolour Ground, 2 to 3. So, and this one doesn't tell us anything. And this one, thin, allow layers to dry completely for each coat. And again, it doesn't say how many layers on here. Multiple coats increase absorbency and opacity, and I suppose that's why I'm going to do multiple coats. So I think I'm going to do, maybe I should do the same. 3 coats, 3 coats. I'm going to do 2 coats. This, because this is already very thick. Maybe I'll just do 2 coats of those two. So 2 coats of those and 3 coats of those. So let's just assume that all of that has happened by the time I come back and talk to you in a second. So it's all finished now, and what I've done is on this golden absorbent ground here, which is really quite smooth. It's very similar to the QOR watercolour ground. I did 3 coats of this, letting it dry for about a day in between each coat. And then this QOR watercolour ground, I did 3 coats on this as well, so 3 coats and 3 coats. Again, they seem very similar, just in terms of how they feel and how they flattened out on the page. And then down here we've got the QOR cold press ground. I did 2 coats on that. And I'll probably get some footage with my mobile phone so you can see this, but it's really really coarse. It's like rough watercolour paper, really quite different to these two and this one here. And then down here, Daniel Smith Watercolour Ground, this is probably the smoothest of the 3, but also it's quite warm. So these are all white, and this one here is warm and got a yellow tinge to it. So whether you wanted that or not, it's just worth being aware of that. And so here I did 2 coats and 2 coats, okay? And I've let them dry for 72 hours before doing this. And so what I'm going to do here is just a bit of an experiment. I'm going to do what I have done before with my mentor Tony Smyber, which is wet this whole circle and then drop pigment, watercolor pigment, into that wet in wet. So we'll do that with these 4 circles here. And then here what we might do is we might just paint a small wet in wet watercolor landscape. And we'll try and do a similar landscape here and here and here. Right, so we're going to do golden absorbent ground first. I'll just move this over here. So all we're going to do is just wet this, and I'm going to make sure that I wet this quite a bit. And just like in watercolor, I'm just checking on the from an angle the sheen on the canvas, or normally the paper, as to how wet it is. And I can see that it is absorbing this water a bit. So I just want to make sure that it's nice and saturated. There we go, that looks pretty good. So let's just get a little bit of this blue red shade and light red mixture. Pick up a bit of that and just drop that in. That's a mixture of cobalt blue and light red. Ah! So, compared to watercolor paper, so far, it's not really getting quite the same degree of cauliflowering, which is interesting because it's just interacting with water, but I can also see that it's drying on the edges fairly rapidly, like that's giving me a hard line there now. And so, interesting, definitely less movement, and I can see some of the canvas texture underneath, which is again interesting. Cool. So, we'll just let that dry, and then we'll move on to the next one. So do the same again. Put water onto this. And this is a very different feel. I don't know if you can see, but I dropped a little bit of the blue red shade and light red onto there before, and interestingly I couldn't lift it completely off, which is interesting, which means it is getting absorbed by this cold pressed ground, this QOR cold pressed ground. Right, it looks nice and wet. Let's start again with the same So what I'm noticing with this is that this is having more movement on the page, definitely, of the pigment compared to the golden absorbent ground. Definitely more movement of the pigment on the page, without a doubt. Interesting. Alright, let's move on to the next one. Alright, lovely. Put this here. So we're up to QOR Watercolour Ground, the one that we did 3 coats on. So I'll just wet that. Like the golden absorbent ground. You see it quite quickly on the edges here. It's absorbing it, drying really quickly. So I suppose working where you might stay where you might need to saturate it a bit more. Alright, we'll let that dry and we'll just move on to the Daniel Smith Watercolour Ground. And so it's a combination of looking at what happens when I lay the pigment onto the page, and then after I've laid it on the page, what happens after that too. And I also suppose the way they behave on this ground will depend how you laid it on, because if I'd have used a roller to put this on, it might be a bit different. I can't imagine it being vastly different, but it would be a bit different. Interesting. So I'm not going to dry these with a hairdryer. I'm just going to let them dry, and I'll just pan back for you so you can see the differences. So I'm not going to dry these with a hairdryer. I'll just keep them here so we can see the differences. So this is the golden absorbent ground up here. This is the QOR watercolour ground here. This is the QOR cold pressed ground here, and this is the Daniel Smith Watercolour Ground here. And actually they're all behaving quite differently. Like for instance here on the QOR watercolour ground, I can see the brush marks much more obviously than in these two, the Daniel Smith or the golden absorbent ground. The Daniel Smith is probably it's almost like hot pressed paper. And so there's a lot of movement that occurs, but not as much granulation, because you need some peaks and troughs for that. So there's a little bit more granulation that occurs in this golden absorbent ground. This is probably pretty good, but it's amazing. This QOR cold pressed ground is substantially different. And if you wanted something to definitely look like watercolour, then this is it's like rough paper, and it's granulating and it's cauliflowering, but it's a very unusual texture, and it even started leaking out almost, like it behaves very interestingly. So I suppose it depends on what effects you're looking for. When I paint, I've got a bit there. Lifts out with a bit of water, which it should, because we'll see. I'll just put some more water on there and just let it sit. So I can't decide, given what I want to do with it. I want to paint large watercolours, and I suppose have it behave as closely as possible to this paper that I currently use. So let's just test that out for a second, okay? Let's just do that quickly. Control for that. Right, let's just do that quickly. Yeah. As you can see, I don't know if you can see that, but already a ridiculously ginormous difference. I don't really need to go any further to just sort of know that watercolour behaves very on watercolour paper compared to any of these grounds. Interesting, so we better just let that dry and then we'll come back to that and see how they look. I have to say, I think at the moment, for just interest and excitement on the page, this cold pressed ground is what I'm leaning towards doing huge watercolors on, even though it feels quite different to the paper I normally paint on is beautiful and soft, and so painting on this will be quite different, but at the same time it's the one with the most amount of movement, similar to the watercolor paper, and also you get granulation much more than the other three, and that granulation, I'll zoom in again with that, okay? I don't know if you can see that very well, but the granulation on that page is, oh, oops a daisy, I was just trying to show you what was happening, but the granulation on there is quite amazing. So I'm just using my 2-inch hake brush. I'm not going to try and keep the water just within the lines. I'm just going to It's interesting. So far for me, I don't really love this golden absorbent ground. Like, it's not behaving like watercolour paper much at all, actually. So it's going to make my paintings generally look a bit stilted if I was to paint them on canvas. There's not a lot of movement of the pigment that I'm used to, and so I might as well just do an acrylic or an oil on canvas with the way that's behaving. So for me, that's a no. It's raining at the moment, as you can hear. Very nice. We need this rain here at the moment, so I'll just come in here and do something similar. We'll just get a little bit here, a little bit here. I definitely prefer the movement that occurs with this cold pressed ground. It's actually a bit harder to control. It's a little bit, I have a bit less control with this than I do with a watercolour page. But having said that, it's definitely preferable over that. It's just going to create more movement, more excitement, and that's what I would like with watercolour. I suppose what we'll see when we dry that off, like how easy it is to create harder edges too, because you don't, I want to be able to create hard edges and soft edges. there of this. Getting used to, but this is definitely quite nice. Right, I'll move this a bit so you can see over here. Alright, we'll move on to the Daniel Smith. Sorry, you can't quite see that, sorry. So the interesting conclusion from all of this, from my point of view so far, is that none of these grounds behave like watercolour on paper in the slightest. So for me to paint large on canvases, I'm either going to have to get to know how you paint with watercolours on canvas, because it's completely different, or get to know how to paint acrylics or oils on canvas. Really, this sort of helps me to realise that probably watercolour on canvas is not brilliant. One last thing I'm going to check out in another episode is this watercolour canvas. We'll see how that goes compared to these 4 different grounds, and that's a Frederick's watercolour canvas. So we'll see how that goes in another episode, and then we'll go from there. So thanks for joining me in this experiment, which interesting, because it's all new for me. So and as you can see on some of them, the water just sits on top, just doesn't go in, just sits on top. Just pretty incredible. So the water, your management of that is very different then. And this is beautiful, but there's no hard edges and a real inability to create hard edges on this. So that I've so far compared to watercolor paper. So yes, interesting. So thanks for joining me. I'll see you in another episode. Thanks guys. Bye. Alright, so I've just played around with a few things here, and I think these are my 2 favourites, the QOR cold pressed ground and the Daniel Smith Watercolour Ground. They're probably, just in terms of even scratching back and what's happening on the page and how it behaved with the brush, they're probably my favourites. So hopefully this was helpful for you, and if you want to check out any of these pictures, you can go across to my Instagram page, Scott Swinson, and you can find some pictures there of some of these. So thanks, and I'll see you later on. Bye.